Once upon a time, video games were allowed to spread their freak wings. It just felt like video game companies weren't afraid to get a little weird with it. So what happened? Why did AAA titles in the early 2000s feel like they were more experimental compared to today, where games try to adhere to some cinematic sense of normality? It feels like gone are the days of Sega Seaman, Nobi Nobi Boy, and Vib Ribbon. Now we get bombarded with game after game of some new Call of Duty, FIFA, or God forbid another Uncharted. If you're not sniffing when I'm stepping in, let me explain. When I said that games used to be weird, I don't necessarily mean it was purely an aesthetic choice. There is a plethora of things that could really define what that means. It isn't just a matter of, I don't really get this, that designates it as such. It can be anything from specific mechanics, it can be a theme, or an overall message. It could even be the whiplash in the way that something is trying to be said or presented. What I'm getting at is that games are more artsy. Like, the industry was really digging into those creative juices, and the consumer was being blessed with title after title of something very unique. Here, let me spit a few examples. Katamari Damacy / We Heart Katamari. Just looking at it, you can tell this was made by true freaks. And personally, I love it. But what specifically made this feel like something you wouldn't see today? Well, the game itself. Just being dropped into an open world with a timer, solely with the intention of rolling any and everything into a ball. Minimal story. We're making stars, bitch. Nothing complicated. And we love it that way. Shadow of the Colossus. The world is empty. There's no progression padding. I mean, there is a story, but you don't have it thrown right into your face. You just hop on aggro and you fucking ride. You ride until you find the big man, and then you kill him. I feel like if you tried to pitch this to a publisher today, like obviously if Shadow of the Colossus didn't exist and this pitch was a standalone, they would probably say something like, yo, no one's going to play this. And finally, Jet Set Radio. Jet Set Radio bring a sort of anti-corporate messaging vibe to the gaming industry that our corporate-dominated world don't really like. I feel like companies try to play it so safe these days that a game about being anti-disestablishmentarianistic, one take by the way, and spraying graffiti all over the place, doesn't seem like it would really fly. Thank God the indie video game scene is around for that sort of thing, but let's just put a pin in that for right now. Now, what are the possible reasons this era even happened? If I were to handpick 4 things, I'd say it probably comes down to lower development costs, hardware transitions, much less market data, and cultural context. Like pre-social media, pre-live service, pre-obsession with microtransactions. With lower development costs, you had smaller teams and less financial risk. They weren't investing millions of dollars into a game and then having to worry about losing their jobs if it wasn't going to fully recoup the cost. With hardware transitions, 3D was established and it was here to stay. We passed that point of no return. So the only logical move was to make everything look and run better. More polygons, more memory. Developers were still fresh off of the arcade mindset with video games, and now it was time to explore what the medium could provide in the way of an interactive experience. Less market data is pretty self-explanatory. Video games at this time were in a transitional phase from being just a niche hobby that geeks enjoyed and moving more into a mainstream hobby that anyone could get into. That being said, companies didn't really have a solid idea of what worked just yet. Nintendo kind of figured it out, their secret sauce that they still use today, which is that if you slap Mario, Link, or Pikachu onto something, it prints money. Companies like Sony and Microsoft didn't really have established icons like that, so they just kind of said fuck it and started throwing shit at the wall to see what would stick. Sega had Sonic, but thankfully they decided to still get by with their IPs rather than slathering the blue blur on everything. Like, you weren't going to see any kind of like Sonic Golf Party with Friends sort of games coming out like Nintendo would do. And the cultural context really needs no explanation either. Microtransactions themselves were the beginning of the end for gaming in the way that they sort of made our greedy corporate overlords see the industry. To understand what happened to video games, let's take a second to look outside of the gaming industry. And for the love of God, stay with me here. But we have to go back to World War II, I say, as the entire audience collectively sighs. First, let's talk about America's post-war economic boom. Okay, so we are fresh off of winning World War II. We're feeling good. We're feeling great. Disposable income fucking skyrockets, baby. Mass production, that's just the norm now. But what are corporations doing at this time? They're shifting strategy and embedding themselves into our everyday lives. Coca-Cola, as an example, starts to fade into invisibility. No longer is it a soft drink that you slurp up. Now it's a brand that's becoming cultural wallpaper. They're marketing happiness, youth, a Norman Rockwell painting of Americana. Coke isn't just the feeling of America anymore. Coke is America. And this idea wasn't like new for Coke either. Like, as a company, they were really good at like shifting their strategy on like branding and embedding into culture. For instance, you know, we didn't even used to depict Santa Claus as being in like a red suit before Coca-Cola. Like, he was green. Like, old depictions of Santa Claus were in green robes. Red was specifically a color choice by Coca-Cola. And why did this work so well? How did Coca-Cola embed itself into the American spirit so easily? Well, it's surprisingly simple. Familiarity builds trust. Trust leads to the minimization of risk. And since people prefer what they recognize, it becomes embedded in our culture. This means that culture becomes predictable. And in the end, predictability equals profit. We never really stop liking new things. We just get trained to like safe things. This isn't something that was exclusive to Coca-Cola, by the way. This isn't something that is mutually exclusive to any sector, really. It's a repeatable cycle, or more so, an evolution of marketing and branding. So, how does this parallel with video games? Early video games were in a pre-corporate phase. Yeah, they were still being produced by giant companies, but they hadn't gone full corpo just yet. No one really had any idea for what a mega successful game looked like. Sure, there was Tetris, but that was it. Studios were still experimenting because they had no other choice but to. We eventually hit a point where metrics started replacing instinct. What's interesting became what's safest. Innovation started looking like a risk and not like a goal. And at some point, video games stopped being allowed to surprise their own publishers. The takeaway? Weird ideas are unpredictable, and as I stated earlier, predictability equals profit. Weirdness gets pushed to the margins, and thus... Okay, we can pull that pin I told you to place earlier. Indies inherit what AAA abandons. Boom, nailed the segue. The weird, the unpredictable, and the risky aren't gone for good. They still exist in the indie game dev scene. It's all alive and well, and I'd even say it's flourishing. If you know where to look and what to look for, you can find plenty of indie titles filling in the niche that the big companies left behind. Untitled Goose Game, Bugsnax, two games I can think of off the top of my head that are charming, bizarre, and carrying that air of experimental gameplay or storytelling, all presented by independent developers. Then you have titles like Undertale and Deltarune, two games that can deliver as much a feeling of determination as it can silly humor and strange visuals. Both not just a success, but a commercial and cultural success. So much so that you can feel the influence that Toby Fox brought with his games, and you can also tell that big gaming notices too. So, what is the future of strange and weird games? Who knows? Personally, I think the future looks bright, and I think we might even start to see larger companies like Nintendo take bigger risks. After all, that is how we got Splatoon, right? Anyway, that's all I got. Let me know in the comments what you thought, and let me know some other games that this video made you think about. Maybe some that other people had forgotten, or maybe some that I've not even heard of before. I hope you liked it, and I hope to see you again. Bye!